Hi, I'm Sophia Leggi. I'm an undergraduate student of history at Michigan State University. I'm an anime enthusiast, history buff, and today we're going to be looking at some scenes of genocide in the anime Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, and we're going to be comparing them to actual events that happened during the Second World War and during the Holocaust in Nazi Germany and occupied Eastern Europe. That being said, let's get started.
So you've decided to become a soldier after all. That's all the proof I need. You're not ready to learn flame alchemy.
But sir, I am. It's the only thing left. I mean, haven't I already mastered the fundamentals of alchemy?
Of course you have. And I regret even teaching you that much, now that I know who you plan on using.
But alchemy should be used for the people, shouldn't it? Master, our country is constantly under threat from all sides. The military needs alchemists. It's a matter of defending our homes. We don't help
I'm
them.
tired of hearing that vile rhetoric.
I can't stand to see you like this. There's no reason for a man of your stature to suffer in this kind of squalor. If you would simply join the military, you could get grants for your research. You could
I don't need a grant for something I've already completed.
You finished your research?
I've created the most powerful alchemy. It would only cause tragedy if I placed it in the wrong hands. And now that I've finished it, I've allowed myself to grow complacent. We alchemists are hungry creatures. We must continue the hunt for knowledge as long as we live.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it right there. I'm seeing a clear parallel between alchemy in this fictional world and industrial science in World War II Germany. The master here is afraid that the soldier will use the alchemy/science for evil purposes, which of course he will. In this world, alchemy is used for the genocide. In our world, the Nazis use modern science and the deadly power of carbon monoxide and hydrocyanic acid to carry out the Holocaust. So nearly everything about the gas chambers was designed by engineers and scientists to maximize their lethality. According to a primary source document written on Zyklon B by Brian Herman, the gas chambers at Auschwitz were built partially underground to maintain a constant temperature that would augment the killing power of Zyklon B. Gas chamber ceilings were also purposefully designed to be quite low to allow better lethality with less poison used. The precision of the engineering was in the calibration of the poison was so that the author of this source actually stated, quote, that the only limiting factor of the gas chamber's death toll was the crematorium for disposing the bodies, as one could conceivably produce bodies much faster by gassing than could be cremated. So clearly, modern science was the primary mechanism by which people were killed in the Holocaust and was responsible for the vast scale of it. And it seems that scientific alchemy will be the primary enabler but mechanism of genocide in this show. And if I'm not mistaken, actually, the real life study of alchemy gave rise to modern chemistry. So there's also that. And the last thing is this rhetoric that the soldiers using. A country is threatened by all sides. We fight to defend our homes. Now that's a very common line in Nazi propaganda. And the master denounces it correctly as vile rhetoric. So there's a lot of things that we can definitely connect to Nazi Germany and the Second World War, for sure.
It's time to confess. Tell me your sins. What did you do to my people?
Ishvalan is a harsh and barren country, filled with rocks and sand. Considering the terrain, it's not surprising that it would give birth to such a stringent religion. Or that its people would be so earnest and resolute. It's only natural that a faction of the population would protest the country's annexation by a mistress. Their mistrust was soon justified. That one bullet changed everything. Their mistrust turned to outrage. Dissidents spread like a contagion. It soon escalated into a civil war, and the fighting lasted 7 long years. until a simple one-page document determined the Ishvalan's fate. Executive Order 3066, the official order to initiate the Ishvalan War of Extermination.
All right, pause. So this is an interesting take on the beginning of genocide. So instead of an executive order, as is depicted here, the final solution really began with something called the Wannsee Conference, which was covered on Lecture 12 on November 16th. The Wannsee Conference occurred in January of 1942 and actually did not include a personal appearance of Hitler, unlike what's portrayed in this scene. Instead, Reich Security Main Office SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich announced that he had been tasked by Hitler himself to coordinate the systematic mass murder of Eastern European Jewry. The Nazis never actually issued an executive order or any of the sort that specifically wrote down, this is the start of the final solution or whatever. It was actually kept quite hush-hush, and Himmler himself actually didn't want anything written down regarding Operation Reinhard, which is one of the biggest killing operations of the Holocaust. So the historical accuracy of this scene in relation to what began the final solution, the Holocaust, the huge genocide, it's questionable at best, just because of the depiction of an executive order. But I do like how seemingly important military members are present at this meeting in the scene where this Hitler figure is signing into law or ordering what is called the Ishvalan War of Extermination. So it's not per se accurate historically, but obviously I understand that it's fictional. It's not supposed to entirely be based off of Nazi Germany. Let's keep watching.
Where other soldiers don't always have a direct line of sight on the effects of their actions, snipers do. And, of course, the state alchemists.
Listen here. I am the Iron Blood Alchemist, Boss Rod. Iron and blood. I am both soldier and weapon. Now stand down. I'm the only man able to take the lead in this battle.
All right, so I'm gonna pause it right there. And I really wasn't expecting that, to be honest. I really wasn't expecting a callback to German unification. So basically when he says iron and blood, it's very, I don't think that's coincidence at all, because Blut und Eisen was the name of a speech that Otto von Bismarck gave in 1862 that announced the unification of Germany. The concepts of Blut, blood, racial purity, and Eisen, iron as a metaphor for German national strength, were also core ideological concepts of the NSDAP. And furthermore, the concept, the idea of a soldier as a weapon or extension of the state is also a concept that the Nazis endorsed quite often. The soldier of the Reich, as they were often called, they were seen as an extension of Nazi racial policy, especially on the Eastern Front. I know this is a small scene and only like 2 lines, but knowing the author of this series, it's unlikely to be a coincidence. I know how much research she did into history, especially European history and combat and whatnot. So I just don't think this is a coincidence, and it's very interesting to hear that kind of a thing in the show. So let's watch the next clip.
There is one, but it's worse than you can imagine. Of my people to create a philosopher's stone? What happened to this stone? It was given to Major Solve J. Kimbley. He was known as the Crimson Alchemist. Did you see what this man looked like? Did he have black hair and cold eyes? Yes. My brother. Keep talking. Everything changed. That single stone turned the battle around.
Okay, so I'm gonna pause it right there. because this scene is very, very interesting to me. So basically, from what I understand of this scene, the Amestrian military is using a religious minority as human sacrifices for an alchemical ritual that will aid their war effort. So this is very, very reminiscent of medical experiments that Nazis performed on concentration camp prisoners. There's a very interesting journal article about Nazi medical experiments by Andrew Korda, written in 2006, that show a number of similarities between this scene and what the Nazis actually did in World War II. At Dachau, there were high altitude and depressurization experiments carried out on prisoners for the purpose of researching the effects of high altitude on the human body, especially in relation to the pilots of the Luftwaffe. The most extensive of these experiments at Dachau were probably the so-called freezing experiments, which were aimed at finding the most effective way to rewarm German aviators that had crashed into the sea. These military results were considered to be of the greatest importance to the German military, as it helped establish, quote, the most effective way to treat rescued shipwreck crews. The scientists involved perceived themselves as seeking answers to legitimate scientific goals, end quote. I think the similarities that I've described between historical reality and this scene speak for themselves. The only other point I'd like to make on the subject is obviously that the Nazi experiments on concentration camp prisoners did not turn the war in their favor, as this philosopher's stone did for Amestris in Ishvalan in this show. And while I understand that Amestris is not supposed to be a copy of Nazi Germany, the idea that a creation of a godly object to turn the tide of a war does perpetuate a bit of the myth of Nazi technological supremacy. Maybe I'm reaching too far though, but I've seen this technological supremacy thing a lot in media, and this kind of reminds me of it a little bit. So there's that as well. Let's keep watching.
With no other options, the Ishvalan surrendered. The high priest of Ishvala, Lo, offered himself to the Fuhrer on behalf of his people.
So, you're asking me to take your life in place of the remaining tens of thousands of Ishvalans?
That's correct. I stand.
How arrogant of you. Do you sincerely believe that your single life is equivalent to the remaining multitude of your followers? Your stature is gone to your head. The life of any individual human is only worth one life. That's all. Nothing more and nothing less. Your life is not enough to call off the extermination.
How can you be so inhuman? You will suffer the hammer of God!
God, you say? Now this is intriguing. How much longer do you think your God plans to wait before unleashing his fury? Just how many thousands of lives must I take before he decides to strike me down?
You're a monster!
Open your eyes. God is nothing more than a construct created by man to inspire fear and promote order.
So I'm going to pause it right there. So the first thing I've noticed about this scene is purely visual. This Fuhrer character looks exactly like Joseph Stalin. It's kind of creepy, honestly, but seems to have a similar ideology to Hitler, although they're not exactly the same. This is interesting, considering the diametrically and violently opposed viewpoints of these historical leaders and the scale of the atrocities each committed. Also, this atheistic speech that the Fuhrer gives that reflects both anti-religious thought upheld by the Soviet Union, as well as hateful anti-Semitic and anti-religious thought that the Nazis endorsed as well. Just I'm struck by the scene because he looks a lot like Stalin. He's talking a bit like Hitler, and these are just very powerful figures to be invoking, especially for a fictional character. All right, let's get on to the next clip.
But even if the Colonel does become the Fuhrer, how will that change the fact that this is still a military state?
Well, it won't. The first thing we'll have to do is restore power to the Parliament. We'll take it back from the military, make it democratic again. Only after the full extent of the military's corruption has been brought to light can this country move forward.
What do you mean?
For example, those who were praised as heroes during the Ishvalan campaign will be brought to trial as war criminals. That's right. In a just, peaceful world, after all that we've done, we'll be seen as mass murderers.
The Colonel is trying to make sure this happens? Isn't that just like committing suicide? The homunculi were the ones pulling the strings. They caused the Civil War.
Even if they were the ones responsible for it, we were the soldiers who carried it out.
Okay, so this scene is very striking to me. Just first off, the talking about how this country is a military state and how there's no power in the parliament. This reminds me a lot of how the Reichstag had been dissolved and stripped of power by Hitler and the NSDAP when they seized and consolidated power prior to the Second World War, excuse me. And then how Hawkeye talks about bringing war criminals to trial is obviously reminds me of the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. There's a difference, obviously. In this case, the victors are the ones bringing themselves to justice, which of course is not historically accurate, neither in that Nazi Germany won or that they would have brought themselves to justice. But that being said, it's a very nice narrative twist in this fiction. It's not very often that you see something like that. And the last kind of thing that I want to talk about is how she really takes responsibility for as a soldier, she takes responsibility for the genocide. This is very important. One of the primary defenses of many mid-level Nazi perpetrators of the Holocaust and war crimes in general was, I was just following orders. With the line that Hawkeye gives, basically she says, we were the soldiers who carried it out. She dismisses this often used Nazi excuse and points the finger of responsibility, not just to those giving the orders, but also to those who executed them. And that's very moving, and it's very important as well.